With dismissive attachment, I'm going to share with you the very simplistic, but I think memorable way that we can model and demonstrate for our clients what these different attachment patterns look like. So what I always say is that in the parent-child relationship or in the parent-caretaker relationship, there is this ongoing dance that's called serve and return. The child is constantly serving. The child is constantly doing things in order to attach and get the attention of the caretaker. And the child is looking for a response, right? They want a return, and it becomes a dance. And so the child smiles and the parent smiles back, and the child makes a sound and the parent imitates the sound back. And the child engages in a kind of movement and the parent does the same movement back, right? Or the child reaches out because they're upset. That's the serve. And the return is the parent picks the child up and comforts the child. So serve and return, a very fundamental dynamic in the parent caretaker child dance. And with secure attachment, you've got this really beautiful dance that's going back and forth where all of the serves coming from the child are meeting with appropriate responses and returns from the caretaker. Okay, so that's serve and return. But with dismissive attachment, the child does the serve, and this is what I do with my client. I just kind of extend my hand. They reach out, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And they get nothing back. Now, this is devastating to a child because, again, the child is wired to expect a serve return response. And when they reach out and they get nothing back because the parent is unavailable, the parent is emotionally neglectful, the parent is disengaged, the parent is rejecting, the child very quickly learns that to do this, to do a serve and get nothing back is too painful. And so what happens for these very, very young children, it's sort of extraordinary how quickly children figure out that doing a serve response, reaching out is not safe. And so what the child learns is that rather than reaching out and literally and metaphorically winding up empty-handed, the child, and now I'm putting my hand behind my back, the child becomes avoidant. They become overly self-reliant. They stop turning to the caretaker. Because again, it's too painful to reach out and get nothing back. Now, these patterns get solidified and they become the relationship template. And so that little child who has learned that the only way to be safe, the only way to not feel the pain of that rejection, the pain of that neglect or that avoidance is to sort of constrict and collapse, become overly self-reliant and not need anything. That child is going to continue to use that same avoidance strategy as they move through childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood. And you know this client because this is the client where you make all this effort to join and to give this client your emotional support and to give them resources. And it's almost like there's this wall, right? And you're just not feeling that they're willing to allow for receiving. They just figure out at very, very young ages that receiving is not going to happen in any way that feels meaningful or predictable or consistent. And so it's just better not to need. And that becomes the coping strategy. So that's dismissive attachment. Then you have a different attachment style, which is called ambivalent. Again, same premise. The child reaches out. They do the serve response. This one's really tricky because sometimes they get no response. Sometimes there's neglect. Sometimes they get slapped for reaching out. So the parent or the caretaker responds with a fight reaction. Sometimes they do get response from the caretaker, but it's a response that can feel enmeshing. It can feel suffocating. It can feel overwhelming. Maybe because the parent is actually responding with some modicum of guilt because many other times they didn't respond at all or they didn't respond appropriately. So there's a kind of overcompensation, but that can feel sort of overwhelming and too much for the child. And sometimes with ambivalent attachment, you reach out and you get what you need and it feels good. But the fundamental problem with ambivalent attachment is it is completely unpredictable. You do not know what you're going to get. And as a byproduct of that total unpredictability and inconsistency, it's very understandable that these kids become very anxious. because they're taking this huge risk. They're reaching out, but they have no idea what the response is going to be. And even if they ask the same thing of a parent, on Monday that they ask on Wednesday, the responses on Monday and Wednesday can be completely different. So we see this very big increase in young children getting diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder at 5 years old. And I think we have to be very suspicious that it's maybe not be, some kind of deficit within the child, but maybe the anxiety that's showing up in preschool and kindergarten. Rather than asking what's wrong with the kid, we have to start asking what's happening to the child. That's a very fundamental and important paradigm shift, because often the anxious child is manifesting the anxiety that is the byproduct of ambivalent attachment. They also subsequently become ambivalent about reaching out. They want to, like they really want to, but they're also terrified too. And so this is where you get the client who can give you a lot of mixed messages. One week they'll tell you you're the greatest therapist in the world, you've totally saved their lives. And the next week they come in totally unsolicited and they'll say, I'm thinking of quitting because I don't think you're helping me at all, right? And it's this emotional sort of push-pull that you feel with these kinds of clients. And really what they are reenacting for you is ambivalent attachment. And I say that so that you don't personalize, it can feel personal. It's not. This is their predominant relationship template, and they're going to play out that template with everybody in their lives, including their therapist. The other insecure attachment pattern is called disorganized. When Mary Ainsworth first conceptualized it, she actually referred to it as disoriented. And over time, that sort of morphed into disorganized. And that's how we talk about it in 2024 and certainly before then. And this is the child who's reaching out, and the only responses that they're going to get back from their primary caretaker is either fight, flight, or freeze. That's it. So in a fight response, the child is going to be shamed. They're going to be physically hit. They're going to be verbally tormented and bullied and ridiculed by the parent for having the normal needs that the child has. That's the fight reaction. If the parent is going to respond with a flight or a freeze reaction, they disconnect. They're not emotionally present. They actually become kind of startled and overwhelmed. The parent does, because they're not able to meet the child's need. So understanding the attachment pattern that your client was given, and if your client had two caretakers, yes, it's quite possible that they got two different attachment patterns. I will tell you, the literature says we need one secure attachment, and that helps to mitigate the sort of negative sequela of an insecure attachment pattern. But it is still confusing for the child to not get the consistency of two caretakers who are able to do secure attachment. But it's incredibly helpful to know the attachment pattern that your client received, whether you're working with a 7-year-old or you're working with a 77-year-old, because that attachment pattern really translates into so many of the thoughts, feelings, and behavioral choices, as well as the relationship dynamics, even the career choices that clients make as a byproduct of attachment. When we're looking at self-destructive behavior, it's critically important to understand the attachment pattern, because with secure attachment, you will learn affect regulation skills. With any of those three insecure attachment patterns, you will not come out of childhood with regulation skills. So that's what this slide is really emphasizing, that our ability to navigate our emotional states has everything to do with successful and secure attachment. When we first come into the world, this little image here demonstrates something that is absolutely necessary and fundamental, and that is a concept called interregulation or co-regulation, meaning the infant really depends upon an outside source, a caretaker, to be comforted and soothed. That's co-regulation, interregulation. If that happens enough of the time, and let me be clear, there's no perfect parents, and that's not the goal. It's being the good enough parent. So if enough of the time the child is getting that regulation from an outside source, and that regulation that they're getting is genuinely healthy and soothing and comforting, all kinds of incredibly powerful things start to happen in that little brain of that infant and that child. They are literally engaging in neurological imprinting. In fact, there's a tremendous amount of new research now that says a baby's developing brain architecture, how the neurons fire and which part of the brains, get accentuated and which of the neurons get pruned. All of that is actually contingent upon the quality of the attachment experience that they're getting. So there's this incredible process of neurological imprinting and modeling and introjection. And through all of those things, the learning that the child is engaging in, the child can internalize this repertoire of soothing. And so interregulation eventually can lead to what this image shows, which is autoregulation. And autoregulation is the child in age-appropriate ways. That's an important caveat. But the child has this beginning developing ability to begin to regulate and manage their own emotional states.